They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
Donald Trump said that in a presidential debate. Fact-checkers rushed to debunk him, supporters rushed to defend him, and TikTokers turned Eat the Cat into a dance challenge.
They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats.
At the end of the day, nobody changed his mind. That is the nature of the immigration debate. People believe whatever they want, so I thought I'd look at a little less biased source. South Park. Matt and Trey have tackled the immigration issue many times from a lot of different angles. Some of the conclusions have been deeply insightful, I think. We're going to look at 3 of those episodes and use them to answer all the big questions. Questions like, what are the pros of immigration? What are the cons? Who benefits? And finally, how can we manage immigration?
He'll have so much more opportunity here than he ever would in Mexico.
That is Butters, aka Mantequilla, in The Last of the Mexicans. While playing Texans versus Mexicans, he gets lost, gets hit by a car, and then gets taken home by a couple that just hit him. The couple gives him a lot of opportunities. Opportunities like cleaning their windows, doing the dishes, and serving their meals. They even get him a present. This is South Park showing how immigrants benefit by getting a job, even if it's a back-breaking and demeaning one. The upper class benefits from cheap immigrant labor. This couple has Butters doing all of their yard work while they just sit around feeling like big shots. That is the immigrants and the upper class. But what about the lower classes? Do they benefit from immigration? For that, we'll have to look at goobacks. The one thing that goobacks does well is drill down the core of the issue. The immigration question gets muddled up by a lot of emotions, racism, classism, and moralistic grandstanding, among other things. However, goobacks goes beyond all that and looks at the one thing that has the biggest effect on people's opinions of immigration. We know it's there, but we don't like to think about it, and we almost never talk about it. But I believe it's the one thing that has the biggest effect on whether somebody is pro or anti-immigration. That thing is individual self-interest. The effect of that self-interest on opinions about immigration is what South Park portrays so well in Goobacks. The episode begins with the boys running a snow shoveling business.
Would you like your driveway and sidewalk shoveled for $8,000?
The lady negotiates them down to $15 and the boys take the job. It's a nice gig. They do it and return the next day.
I'm sorry, boys, but I've already hired someone else to do it.
And she did that because...
He said he would do it for 25 cents.
Let's rewind for a bit. What happened? Well, an immigrant came from the future looking for work. His plan is to do the one thing I wish my grandfather had done. Get a job, earn money, put it in a savings account, and then let it earn interest and multiply over the years so his descendants can have comfortable lives. This plan works, and a hell of a lot more immigrants start pouring through the time portal. Because they plan to compound the interest of their money over 1,000 years, these immigrants are willing to work for a lot less. The boys shovel the snow for $15, but the time immigrants are willing to do it just for 25 cents.
25 cents? Well, that's not even worth it.
The boys want to try their luck at other houses but face the same exact problem. The goobacks have taken the jobs. The boys are not the only victims, because the goobacks are willing to work for such low wages they get hired all over America. And the other blue-collar workers are not happy about that.
They took our jobs!
This, of course, is exaggerated for comedic effect, but is there any truth to it? Are immigrants taking our jobs? It's a very contentious question, and no matter how you answer it, somebody will call you stupid. It doesn't help that the studies on the subject are hopelessly unreliable because of how politicized the issue has become. Right-wing studies would tell you that immigration depresses the wages of American workers, and left-wing studies would tell you that immigration does not affect wages in any way at worst, and actually improve wages in some cases. It's hard to know who to believe. You have to conduct your own unbiased study to determine the real truth, but even then, measuring the alternate reality of what wages could have been in the absence of immigration is extremely difficult. The best we can do is compare 2 countries, the United States and Japan. The US takes in about 1 million immigrants per year, while Japan has taken in almost no immigrants until very recently. Both countries are doing well, but over the last 30 years, the US economy has done way better than the Japanese economy, which has basically stagnated since the Japanese population stopped growing. Now, this is not a perfect comparison because the economy is influenced by 1 million different factors. We can't say that all of America's economic growth is due to immigrants, but if they were a net negative, then America couldn't outperform a country like Japan, which takes in very few immigrants. Or we could look at the Persian Gulf countries. Places like Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates have immigrants making up for more than 80% of their populations, and they're doing great, at least economically. But these places are swimming in oil, so they can't accurately represent real countries. Nevertheless, we can just use a comparison between America and Japan to conclude that at the very least, immigration is not a net negative. An average person in America earns double what an average person in Japan makes. While the "they're taking our jobs" narrative seems to intuitively make sense when you first hear about it, thinking about it a little deeper exposes the problem. The narrative assumes that there is always a fixed number of jobs, but that's not true. A healthy and growing economy is always creating new jobs. So immigration only becomes a problem when the economy isn't growing or when the rate of immigration is higher than the rate of job creation. In fact, one of the reasons why Western countries are taking in immigrants is because the birth rate has fallen below the replacement level. So we import working-age people from countries with higher birth rates to replace all the retiring boomers because we didn't make enough babies. Japan has also started accepting immigrants recently because its population is also shrinking. Countries admit immigrants to taking place of their babies they never had. Would you make the same argument about babies? Are those adorable little kids coming to take our jobs? Also, from a purely economic standpoint, immigrants are cheaper than babies. A country can have a baby and then feed and educate him for 20 years with the hope that he grows up to become a productive adult. Or it can import a ready-to-work 20-year-old from another country who has already been fed and educated by somebody else and save up all the childcare costs. But a country doesn't run on economics alone. There are social considerations as well. The economic arguments against immigration may be weak, but the social tensions are not. There are two types of social tensions in the immigration debate. First, we have social tensions between the natives themselves. Gubax portrays conflicts between anti-immigration righties and pro-immigration lefties perfectly.
On my right is pissed off white trash redneck conservative,
And on the left is
aging hippie liberal douche.
the Montekers say it all. It's how both sides see each other. And as they argue, we see the problem with immigration debates. Daryl, the redneck, can't really articulate his thoughts, so he just keeps saying,
They took our jobs!
This is of course dismissed, and Daryl is labeled as an intolerant redneck. Sure, on a national level, immigrants may not be taking people's jobs, but on an individual level, it has to be happening to somebody. If you work construction like Daryl and you lose a gig to an immigrant, you might start to believe that he took your job. People pulling out data showing that it's not really happening is not going to change your personal experience or your feelings. Daryl's mistake here lies in faulty reasoning. He may have lost his job to an immigrant, but he could have lost it to an American just as easily. If you're unemployed, then by Daryl's logic, every single person who has a job you want is taking your job. Once you frame it that way, you start to see the flaws in that argument. But the aging hippie liberal douche is not interested in seeing things from Daryl's point of view. Just like most lefties do on the immigrations debate, he chooses virtue signaling over any practical solutions.
Your ancestors came to America as immigrants. What right do you have to turn these people away?
This is a common counter meant to show the liberal douche's intellectual superiority when it's really just stupid whataboutism. So Daryl and the hippie liberal douche end up talking past each other and no one's mind is changed. We see the same conflict with Stan and Randy. When Stan uses the Gubax slur, his father flips out.
Oh my god! Stan Marsh, how dare you use that time-bashing slur?
But why is Randy so defensive of the Gubax? Is it because he strongly believes in human dignity? It could be. Or it could be because...
That's our new housekeeper, Mrs. Whoa.
She'll do it for 10 cents an hour.
Here, Randy represents the comfortable middle class. These are the folks with good white-collar jobs who aren't really threatened by immigration. In fact, they benefit from it in the form of cheap labor. And when Stan complains about immigrants taking his job, Randy has a classic response that I'm sure you've never heard before.
They're only taking the small menial jobs that nobody else really wants to do.
That statement is taken as fact on its own, but it's never really explored further. The reason nobody wants to do these jobs is because they're difficult and they pay very little. Immigrants aren't doing those jobs because they like them. They do them because they have to. The same goes with natives. You may not want to clean toilets or pick strawberries in the hot summer sun for minimum wage, but if that's the only job you can get, you're gonna have to suck it up and do it anyway. If you get something that pays better, you quit. Natives tend to have that option. Immigrants who aren't highly educated usually don't have that same choice. But of course, this is all lost on Randy. He ignores the very obvious way that he is benefiting from cheap immigrant labor with a housekeeper cleaning his house for 10 cents an hour and chooses moral grandstanding. He says the people from the future have had a hard life and Stan should not judge them.
We're not raising our son to be an ignorant time-cyst.
Randy is progressive right until the moment he loses his job to an immigrant.
Oh my god.
They took my job!
Then he turns into an intolerant redneck. Kinda like how those folks at Martha's Vineyard were very welcoming of immigrants, until somebody busts those immigrants to their neighborhood. The social tensions between the natives over immigration are actually small potatoes compared to the massive social tensions that can arise between immigrants and the natives.
School board has mandated that I must now teach class in both present-day English and future speak.
What?
This is not well received. Kyle says that if the kid from the future wants to live in the present, they should learn the language.
Dude, hold on. This is bullcrap. If they want to live in our time, then they should learn our language.
The other kids agree with them, but the aging hippie liberal douche appears and, as if on cue, tells the kids how wrong they are.
These immigrants have a right to retain their culture. Who are we to say our language is best?
This is a pointless disagreement. South Park shows how the aggressive right wants to completely assimilate the immigrants, while the conciliatory left doesn't want to assimilate them at all. And in the midst of all the extremist nonsense, the reasonable solution is never discussed. Sure, immigrants have a right to retain their culture, but when you decide to live somewhere, you also have a responsibility to learn local customs. Some degrees of assimilation is always necessary. Assimilation creates a more harmonious society. When immigrants fail to assimilate, you're going to have problems. Season 19's Where's My Country Gone shows just how bad things can get when these social tensions are left to fester and fester under the surface.
In today's world, it's like you can't even say anything negative about illegal immigrants.
Randy appears right on cue to teach this uneducated redneck some manners.
Because the correct term is undocumented immigrants. All right, bruh?
In Where's My Country Gone, the problematic immigrants are not time travelers from the future, but rather Canadians. Here, South Park uses Canadians to show how silly anti-immigrant tensions can be. Americans don't hate Canadians because many of them think Canada is a town in North Dakota, so using them as problematic outsiders is very funny.
Alright, guy. Hey, buddy. Hey, buddy. Hey, what's going on, friend? Hey, buddy. Another moose head, eh?
Silly as the tensions might be, South Park also shows how heated they can get. The customs of the Canadians constantly clash with those of the Americans. Mr. Garrison gets in trouble for yelling at Canadians to go back where they came from after they play trumpets in class.
So did you forget that at 8 and 11, all Canadians face east and play Chuck Mangione?
Even in the cafeteria, the Canadians sit separate from the other kids, which those kids don't like. This is South Park taking a dig at how the very people who complain the loudest about immigrants not integrating are also the ones who never hang out with immigrants. They avoid immigrants, and the immigrants respond by self-segregating, which makes the problem worse. These racial tensions rise and rise.
So weird. There's just so many of them.
Cartman starts a conspiracy theory involving Jews, and Mr. Garrison decides to run for president after being forced to take a Canadian language class.
There's a bunch of Canadians here and I'm gonna do something about it!
Mr. Garrison proposes an immigration policy that he believes will solve the problem.
Mr. Garrison, you believe the immigration problem is easy to solve.
Yes, f them all to death.
The boys decide to solve the problem by sending one of them to date a Canadian girl.
It's kind of like when the princess of one country marries the prince of another.
Butters is the lucky man. He gets selected to date a Canadian girl. When he gets invited to dinner with her family, he realizes how wrong he was in his assumptions.
It's bad enough we have to live in America, now all the boys with maple fever are gonna want to have it our daughter.
The Canadians don't really want to be in America. This surprises Butters. Like most Americans, he can't imagine that anybody would want to live anywhere else. Americans tend to arrogantly assume that theirs is the greatest country in the world, and it probably is, but a lot of immigrants still like their home countries. They're often forced to leave because of exceptional circumstances. What circumstances are those, you may ask? That takes us back to Mr. Garrison. He learns that the Canadians have built a wall. They say that they have some cool stuff back there and they don't want him to see it. So naturally, he decides that he must see whatever it is they're hiding.
We'll see what they've got behind that goddamn wall.
So he gets himself stuffed into a barrel and takes the ride down Niagara Falls. It turns out that Canadians are holding a lot of misery. Empty streets, abandoned buildings, and crying people jumping out of those buildings. But their president is dancing in his office. It turns out the Canadians elected a character just like Garrison as president, and he screwed the country up 57 ways to Sunday.
If certain people want to leave this country, then let them!
And almost all of them lost. but they are about to come back.
How did a U.S. citizen get past my wall?
Garrison and the Canadian president yell at each other until Garrison gets mad and boinks him to death. When the Canadians hear that their president has been poked to death, they celebrate, pack up, and return home. The people celebrate as the Canadians leave, and Mr. Garrison uses this incident to claim that his plan to poke all the immigrants to death works. Kyle is the only one who sees the problem with this.
It's that we have to stop this kind of sensationalistic politics before the same thing happens to us.
But then he gives up midway because no one wants to listen to him anyway. This is an analogy for how exploiting racial tensions and meddling in other countries can have unwanted consequences. Changing the regimes of other countries has a mixed track record. America did fairly well in World War II by installing friendly regimes in places like Japan and Germany. Then there was the Cold War, which saw a long list of interventions, with mixed results. Even today, America is successfully propping up regimes like that of the Saudis and other kings in Persian Gulf. But there were a lot of failures, like when the American-backed Shah of Iran was overthrown by Islamists. Or when America got rid of dictators in Somalia, Iraq, and Libya, only to plunge those countries into eternal civil wars, causing refugees from those wars to pour into Europe. There is also Syria. What started as the West backing pro-democracy protest has turned into a 13-year civil war that has forced nearly 7 million people to flee the country. So changing foreign regimes is not an approach that guarantees good results. But South Park has other ideas. In The Last of the Mexicans, America becomes so crappy that all the Mexicans start crossing the border back to their own country. But the episode is far more focused on ripping on American arrogance towards immigrants rather than providing solutions to the immigration problem. For realistic solutions, we have to go back to Goobacks. Remember that? The time portal in Goobacks only works one way. Immigrants can travel back to the past, but they can't return. Striking Worker's first idea is to the time immigrants. Their congressman doesn't agree.
Dear intolerant rednecks, we feel your solution of shooting everyone who crosses the time border is inhumane.
So the men decide the only way to stop the migrants from the future is to stop the future from happening. After brainstorming, one of the guys comes up with a brilliant idea.
Take off all our clothes, scramble into a big pile, and start getting gay with each other.
The men go quiet and start thinking about it. It's a winner.
If we can get everyone to turn queer, then there won't be no children to have no children.
You can guess the rest. Turn everyone gay so that there are no future humans. This is South Park mocking one of the more popular conspiracy theories on the anti-immigration hard right. You know, the one about the globo-homo elites turning everyone gay as a form of population control. Amid all this madness, somebody has the presence of mind to speak some sense about the issue. Stan. He expresses sympathy for the time immigrants and then commits a cardinal sin.
If we let them all come back to our time, then it's just gonna make our time crappy too.
But they don't crucify him for that, because the hippie literal douche has abandoned his post. Stan suggests that instead of preventing the future from happening, these men should make the future better. If the future is nice and livable, then the immigrants won't have to travel back in time looking for work. Everyone acknowledges that he's right.
If we build for a better future, the immigrants will stay there.
So the guys from the gay pile start working for a better future. They plant trees, they recycle, they give food to the poor people in Africa, they help the homeless, they build windmills, install solar panels, and they use electric cars.
Look, it's working!
As they do all these things, the time immigrants begin fading away. With the nice future, they don't have to travel back in time looking for work anymore. As the guys are in the field practicing sustainable agriculture, Stan is struck by an idea.
This is gay. Yeah, this is even gayer than all the men getting in a big pile and having with each other.
So the men go back to the pile and the episode ends here. And this is a very hilarious gag, but it's a little sad when you think about it. Here, South Park is making an obvious reference to foreign aid. The only way to stop immigrants from pouring into the West is to help them rebuild their home countries. If they have opportunities there, they won't have to leave. But with this hilarious gag, South Park points out that the guys who hate immigration are the exact same guys who hate foreign aid. They don't want to send American money to foreign countries, but they also don't want people from those countries to come here. The problem is that you can't have both. As long as a Mexican can make 5 times his salary by crossing the border, he will cross that border. Now, foreign aid has many, many, many problems. But when it's done right, it can really work wonders. After World War I, the Allies punished Germany by imposing massive reparations. This caused a lot of suffering in Germany. A certain Austrian painter rose to power and started World War II. After World War II, the Allies decided against punishing Germany. Instead, the US government decided to rebuild West Germany. Adjusted for inflation, the US spent $120 billion rebuilding Germany, and the German government was required to match every dollar the US spent. So the total reconstruction budget was $240 billion. 70 years later, Germany is the largest economy in Europe, larger than even the UK, which actually won both world wars. Of course, America didn't help Germany out of the kindness of its heart. It wanted to stop the communists from taking over. The same thing happened with Japan and the other defeated countries. Now we can all fantasize about driving BMWs we can't afford with our anime waifus. But that desire to help foreign countries is gone. As soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, foreign aid slowed to a trickle. Now many of these countries have many of their own problems that they should probably work out first. So it's a complicated problem, and my brain is clearly not big enough to think of a solution. So, what are your ideas?